Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. This is the place where you can come get your tech questions answered 7 days a week. You can ask your questions using Mukana. There, you can also vote questions up or down and discuss them with others. If you don't have Mukana, you can sign up at officehours.global/join. You will start to get emails with links on how to navigate the system, including Mukana, our Discord, and more. If you don't want to sign up, you can just ask your questions using the QR code that's about to pop up on the screen in the corner down there. Shoot that with your phone or anything else that manages to capture QR codes, and it'll take you into the system where you can add your questions to the queue, and then everybody can vote on those questions when they get to the top. That means we spend more time and get to them quicker than the ones that have fewer votes. That's kind of how everything works. Let's go to our first question. Alexander, what have we got today?
First question's from Scott Hancock in Tokyo. For ENG-style live streaming with proper gear, looking for the kind of dramatic noise reduction seen on DJI/Rode/Comica prosumer mics available on a portable Pro mixer. Can Noise Assist get that aggressive?
Jason, what do you think?
I would put Noise Assist on par with absolutely everything I have ever used. It is astoundingly powerful. That said, I've never used prosumer mics on it. I've always used professional level mics. Alex
Lindsay.
If you're going past Noise Assist, you've got other problems. So I would definitely not. I just use Noise Assist in a server room with thousands of servers, running full tilt with big fans and everything else. Now, part of it was we used an SM58, which has a lot of off-axis rejection, but it was with the SM58 and Noise Assist, the other side said they couldn't hear the server room. So it was a very effective solution to make that actually work. So I can't imagine it getting more than that, and you having it be a thing to do some work on. Now, the problem with Noise Assist is you have to go through a sound devices apparatus to get it, and that's kind of, you only got a couple channels. So what we've used in the past, what we used before Noise Assist was there, were Cedar. Cedar has a DNS2, which is a stereo. It's a stereo noise reduction. There's also a DNS8. Which is it'll do 8 channels. So you do send and receive out of your mixer into the DNS. And those Cedar has been around for a long time, and they're kind of considered the standard for a lot of those things. You can actually get Cedar, by the way, for your mix pre's and Scorpios and so on and so forth, a separate license that you can buy. But Cedar's really the industrial solution that you would tie things into. We'd love to see sound devices do something like that as well.
Alexander Knight.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of using excessive noise processing. For this kind of stuff, the thing is, I want to get a sense of place where that person is. So, if you're doing ENG style stuff, you're often interviewing, you're going out into the world. I don't think it's a big deal to have a little bit of whatever's happening there come into the audio. But that's why we also use proper mics. For example, like you can use the Sennheiser MD46, which is an excellent microphone. It's got an extra long handle and a double layer grill. This has excellent off-axis rejection, astoundingly well. If you try some of these mics, you'll often find that you don't really need to be heavily processing your audio because the microphone itself is doing a lot of the work. And that's really the key, is using the right tool for the right job. So use the right microphones, and I think you'll probably be okay.
Alex, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, one note, I do find that sound device is a little more gentle than Cedar. Cedar, if you turn it up too high, you'll hear the bits as it does what it needs to do, and things you feel like you can hear the digital bits there. So, and I don't have that happen as often. So I definitely would lean towards sound devices if I could in that pipeline, but Cedar is very effective. The other thing is that if you take out too much of it, it feels odd. we found that if we turned it up too high, you didn't hear the audience, you didn't hear anything else. So we actually pulled it back. We just want to make sure that you understand, you still feel like you're wherever they are, but you also make sure that it's clear enough that you can hear them. Sometimes we end up removing everything from the vocal mic, but have audience mics that we mix back in so that we have some control of what that actually looks like.
And Scott, since you noted ENG style, that's electronic news gathering, and one of the biggest challenges of ENG is you're out in the field, you don't know what the sound profile is going to be. You may be moving around, doing a walk and talking interview, so that background noise may be changing. A lot of these do their work by sampling the background sound and then intelligently reducing just that and trying to keep away from the voice content that you want. So sometimes, I know I use the Cedar plugin here on my Universal Audio Apollo Solo, and I noticed that the very first time I set it up after I've done a complete reboot, I can hear a little noise in the background. Then over the first maybe 3 to 5 seconds, it gets lower and lower, and then suddenly it's completely gone. It's learning the profile of the audio coming in. It's paying attention to what is signal and what is noise and reducing the noise. And in that way, you've got a bit more of a challenge, I suspect, if you're out where the noise profile is changing constantly and it's trying to keep up with understanding what's noise and what's not. So just be aware of that. ENG style can have its own challenges. Let's go on to our next question.
Callum McCorkle in Bournemouth, Leeds. This is a QR code question. With all of the incredible advancements announced in the Apple presser, could Apple have finally been able to take advantage of some of the ages-old technologies using scalar energy? Would it have advanced the cameras even more?
Alex Lindsay, what do you think?
Apple usually stays pretty far behind technology. So we always think of Apple as breaking new ground, and they are a lot of times in the cameras themselves. But for the most part, Apple, actually watches other people do what they're going to do, and then applies Apple principles to it to make it oftentimes a little bit easier to use and a little bit smoother. Scalar technology is still fairly unproven, and probably 10 years from where Apple would probably start having conversations about it. That's my guess.
Interesting. Let's go on to our next question.
From the QR code, Marielle Jusha-Mier in Wablo is asking, will Google and Facebook's private undersea cables give them an unfair advantage over small streamers?
Yeah, it looks like an interesting TechCrunch article that came out of. Jason Bates, what do you think?
A lot of the streams eventually end up on one or both platforms, but I suppose in the short run, yes. Of course, with a private CDN, you can always usurp that anyway. But yeah, to some degree.
Alex, what do you think?
If you're trying to stream without a large platform, you're already at a huge disadvantage to a level that is not really competitive at this point. So you really have to have a vertical that makes sense for you. If you're going to do it yourself, if you're going to somehow put that together, you can't really scale because it's not the underwater cables, by the way. It's the peering agreements. So there are peering agreements that are made with most of the CDNs make with the telcos that are very, very important as far as efficiency and scalability. And so without those peering agreements, which all the major providers have, like if you use AWS to stream, you're taking advantage of the peering agreements that AWS has. Netflix is the one that fought them for a long time and then gave up and did them because people like Apple just came in and paid whatever they needed to pay to make it happen. But if you're using an Akamai or you're using Bright Cove or you're using AWS or Livestream, you're paying for some of that stuff already being sorted out for you. But rolling your own streaming is good for highly vertical, very niche, bespoke shows. I mean, when I say that, I mean less than 100,000, viewers. So if you're in like 10,000 or 5,000 or 8,000, you probably pull it off. But you can't. Once you get larger than that, you need to use a service. And in fact, probably over 10,000, you really need to start thinking about a service like an Akamai or something like that is going to solve that problem for you. You're not going to be able to do it yourself because you don't have those agreements in there. So there's no small streaming solution at this point that really makes sense.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, is Saturday Night Live off to a good 50th season? That's quite a milestone. There's a Paste magazine article there.
Oops. Excuse me, Alex. Did you watch last night?
No, I didn't. I don't know. I mean, like, here's the thing with SNL is that I don't think about it anymore. Like, and it used to be something that my family kind of revolved around. I can do poor imitations of many of the characters in SNL from the late 80s and early 90s when it was very hot. I think that they have had trouble in the new era keeping up with what needs to be done. I wait if something's funny. Usually, I assume it's going to show up on YouTube, from them. And I think it was one of those things that what's interesting is that there was a moment where NBC very aggressively kept SNL off of YouTube. And I was thinking about this when I saw this question earlier this morning, and I realized that's when I stopped watching. Is that it was like they had lost the culture, of that process, and I felt like they were backwards, and I felt like they were not keeping up with the times because you want to see something the next day. And they finally got around to that, but there was a couple of years, 4, 5, 6 years, where they were really aggressive about any SNL stuff showing up, and it was just kind of an old way of thinking that I think for some reason created a separation that I just never came back to.
Linda and I watched it last night because it's just an old tradition of ours, and it was an interesting debut for this year. Standout for me, Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, did Tim Walsh in the beginning opening. It was just spot on. It was fun to watch a serious comedian get brought in. Nobody's expecting that, and because Mr. Walsh is running for office and is very profile, but he's still a relatively new player in most people. The precision of that impression I thought was just extraordinarily done. And I didn't know Jim Gaffigan could do impressions. I thought of him purely as a comedian, a touring comedian. They had a lot of good moments in the show, and there was a lot of filler in between, as there always seems to be on Saturday night. These are my personal impressions of it. I enjoyed it. The Weekend Update segments were funny, and they're pushing the envelope. They're being pretty attacky about both sides and everything else, which is their job. So that was kind of fun. And overall, I thought it was good. Gene Smart, who was the host last night, is a solid performer, has been around forever, and she did a fabulous job, as she always does. So I found it interesting. We'll see how it goes as we continue. I think in the next 3 or 4 shows they've announced both the musical guests, which is always of interest to me. They had Jelly Roll on last night. I didn't know much about him a year ago. I've seen him more and more. Excellent performer and a fine voice. So I learned some things that I didn't know before. I had a good time watching it. Let's go on to the next question.
From the QR code, Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada. If something breaks or gets damaged on a Mix Pre 3, where do I send it for repair?
Alex Lindsay, where do you think?
Sound Devices.
There you go.
Madison, Wisconsin. So Sound Devices is there. Call them. Tell them what's there. They'll tell you what it does. I mean, you might be able to take it to, depending on what's broken, there could be some possibilities of, it's Reedsburg. Mickey, it's outside of Madison, Wisconsin. People would know where, I guess. Anyway, so you may be able to go to something like a Gotham Sound or a On Location, and they might be able to help you with some things. But generally, I would call them and do an RMA, and they're usually they're a great company to work with. So, and they're in Reedsburg. It's a big building. So I've actually been there. So they have incredible setups to build things and to repair them. Moving
on, next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is asking, camera specs of the human eye, TLDR, 14K image, 21 stops, 800,000 ISO, up to 220 frame rates per second. Is this even useful?
Well, that's what's going to be the eventual consumption device is the human eye. So what the heck? Jason Bache, start us out here.
It's useful as a concept to begin understanding perception. So much of the human eye has to do with the visual cortices and the way that the brain processes images, that comparing it directly to a camera in that way doesn't really make sense. You ask ChatGPT and it says, 576 megapixels per eye and, 180 degrees field of view and an aperture of 2.1 to 3.5. It just really depends on what part of perception you're trying to measure and how accurately you want it. You really want it to directly correlate.
Alex Lindsay.
I think when they tested it, what we don't know is whether this was before or after the morning coffee, as far as frame rate. Because I can tell you.
There's a variable for you.
Before my coffee, my frame rate is very low and my resolution is low. My ISO is kind of all over the place. But after coffee, it's a different story. I like Jason, I think that it's interesting when you think about when we're trying to deliver a live experience, the closer we close in on those kinds of numbers, the more it looks like you're just looking at a window. And I think that's what we have found is that live really wants as many frames as you can throw at it. We're trying to get to 120. The technological leap to go from 120 to 220 or 240, people have talked about it, by the way. Like, hey, the human eye is 220. We should get to 240, and then it's faster than the human eye. But the amount of data that's required to do that at 14K, in 12 bits so that you can have your 21, it gets to be a little absurd. So, but maybe not in 10 years.
For me, what's interesting is having watched the chip revolution in video cameras so that, as they gather more and more data and are able to pass it through, the capabilities, what it's capable of keeps improving. And you think about that, with the human eye, you've got the eye and the brain. And the brain, I mentioned this before on the show, but it's astonishing to me when I see a video of the bass player and I'm listening to a piece of music, my brain filters out the bass and brings it forward because I'm seeing it happen. So it seems like I can almost hear it better when I can see it. And that's just this mix of the signals reaching you, but your brain being able to process them and do all sorts of other stuff. That's why I think the human brain, human eye is going to be hard to outrun in terms of however much technology you can throw at it, because it's just so good at all that multiprocessing. Because let's face it, the eye and your ears are what kept you alive when we were crawling out of the ooze. So it's mission critical for human beings to have that connection work well. Let's go on to the next question.
From the QR code, Supreet Singh in Bangalore is asking, is it possible to have multilingual audio, more than one language, and or closed captions in multiple languages for YouTube live streams, not VOD?
Alex.
Yes and no. So the no part is they all have to be different streams. The yes is, yeah, you can do it if you're willing to make all those streams. You can have as many languages as you want. I believe that out of India, His Holiness the Dalai Lama produces, I think, as many as 18 to 22 of these languages. So basically what you're doing is you're building an event for all of those streams. But you can't, there used to be a multi-language. So there used to be a multi-angle, which was 6. You could do live, you could do 6 of them, and then they would end up as 6 VODs later, but that you could do live and you could put what we did, I don't know what they made this for. I think that they thought that people would actually change angles, but there's a little bit of a delay. But what we did is we did the 6, and what we did is we put little flags on them for the languages. And usually we use the UN 6 to do that, but that got thrown, that died at some point. What you can do is build a new event for each one of these. Now, that way you either have to, show it on your front page. What most people do is they build a page that's going to refer back to those YouTube channels. So they're embedding all of those YouTubes into something so that you have an interface. You're building a web page that has an interface to the YouTube streams, and you have lots of YouTube streams. On any of those streams or all of those streams, you can insert closed captions. Now, typically typically that's done. I mean, I think that HTTP version is still available. I'm not 100% certain because we stopped using HTTP a decade ago. And we're mostly using, inserting it. So the way you insert closed captions, AI Media will let you stream to them, and then they will insert the captions and stream. Well, they will insert it into the data stream and then send it to YouTube. Or you can use hardware. AI Media acquired EEG, which is the hardware standard around the world to do this. And they make what's called a 492. A 492 is going to take your SDI signal. You can have a captioner sit there, or you can attach to iCap. And iCap can either attach to a captioner remotely anywhere in the world, or it can actually attach to an AI captioning system. So you can use AI for that, and it'll insert into the SDI signal that the line in line 21, it'll insert the captions. That's what it's there for, bank data. And so then it goes into your encoder. And as long as your encoder knows how to encode for captions, it'll send it as a separate data stream over RTMP to YouTube. to make that actually work. And so you can do that to one or, again, all of them if you choose to. So that's your option. You definitely can do lots of languages, but you can't get them all into one thing. And we wish we could. You can if you're using something like, if you're not using YouTube and you use something like Akamai, or you use the Apple Foundation player. So if you're using like an Akamai with the Apple Foundation player, you can do things like insert, you can have as many languages as you want, and they'll show up as a selector in the player. Not all players support that. That's why I said the Apple Foundation player, because it does. And it's just looking for the separate inside of the manifest. You would establish what and where those languages are, and the manifest will drive the player to look for those streams coming in separately as VTTs.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. When streaming on multiple platforms, do you get better results sending one stream to an aggregator like Restream and letting them transcode for each platform, or sending one stream for each platform directly from your setup?
Alexander Knight, you raised your hand on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I've had some experience with Restream lately, and I've been really liking it. For me, it has become an essential service because of the transcoding feature. What I've discovered is that a lot of platforms will have very strict requirements. They will actually throw your data away, and you will have zero live stream if you don't send the right amount of bits to them. So the transcoding service has been working really well. I don't know if there's other platforms or competitors to Restream that will do this. It's not cheap to buy transcoding hours, but if you want to be in as many places as possible and have the best possible looking stream that conforms to those requirements, that works really well.
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for absolute quality, you want to do as much. You want to have as much control as possible. Restream is very convenient, but you are taking the data that you send, which is typically not very much higher than what Restream's going to send, and they're retranscoding that, and that's not going to yield the best results. Inside of that, it is going to be compatible with the other formats, but it's not necessarily going to be the best solution. What you need to do is you need to have a service that you can send. And I don't know, I haven't used Restream in a long time. When I started using it, it was buggy. So we stopped using it. But we're looking at going back to that. One of the conveniences is that that Restream will stream to anything. So if you're trying to figure out how do I send to something, to what Alex said, how do I send to something like, lots of very obscure services and everything else. Before the troubles in Ukraine, I needed to stream to VT, which is the kind of the Russian version of Facebook, for a gaming launch or whatever. They wanted to stream to Russia as well. And the only way to do it was Restream. So you had to build it out there because they were the only ones to get there. This is a long time ago, obviously. And so Restream can do that kind of thing. And it does do it correctly. It keeps track of all of those things, works with those companies. And so that it does that for you. So if you're not doing a lot of this yourself, it's really convenient to use it. The advantage of doing it yourself is that you can hand code everything for each one of those. The best solution, the way it's going to look the best, is you have your own hardware encoders, and each one of them is sending to each service at the maximum bit rate that they can handle with the correct GOP size, the correct segment size, the correct frame, all the things that they want, and you're sending that out, and it's kind of customized for those. I would generally leave it at 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second. Almost all of them do 30 or 60, whether you send it 24 or 48 or whatever it is, you're going to get 30 or 60. Like those are the things. A lot of those have standardized on that. And so you're going to get a better, like for instance, if you want the best, then you're going to use something like Akamai, and we build the ladder ourselves. So the 8 different resolutions that you have, we are doing that because we have refined our encoding specifically for our project to be the highest quality at the levels that we want. But that's expensive to do. But I think Restream is a very convenient solution for that. And again, I prefer like a link to an AWS because I can send a bigger pipe. I can send 20 meg or 50 megs a second into AWS, and then I'm going to compress it down into the formats that are necessary to go out to the different services.
Alexander, you want to get back in on this?
Yeah, I just want to add quickly just some additional information here. And everything Alex said is 100% accurate, and that's good advice too. But my experience for me, there's a couple other things. One, Restream collates the chats from across all platforms. That is a big deal if you're a one-person operation like me and you don't have a team of people to manage comments from all these platforms where you can just reply to everybody across all these platforms without having different browser tabs open. That is super convenient. The other thing for me, quality, I would say quality-wise, and I've been using Mimo Live, I send a much higher bit rate to Restream than, and I actually have been finding that it doesn't reprocess it unless you specifically hit the transcode option. So for example, like if I send 15,000 kilobits, it'll send that out to YouTube. It'll warn you saying you're sending more than what YouTube wants, but it will definitely take that. So in my specific use case, I found that going from the ATEM's built-in live streaming, which not the greatest world live streaming encoder, it definitely looks better for sure. Like going through Mimo Live to Restream to YouTube and other platforms, coming from the ATEM for me definitely looks better.
Alex, you wanted to get back in?
Yeah, and Mickey was pointing out that a lot of platforms transcode once the feed is there, and most of them do. When I mention Akamai, what Akamai does is it doesn't do anything. Like you have to, it's really like the NASCAR version or the F1 version of what you're doing. They assume you know what you're doing, and they just pass your ladder forward. They're not re-encoding what you're doing. So usually if they're re-encoding, you only need to send one stream. Also, Twitch is kind of doing this thing where they're allowing the streamers to have 4K, but it's also, hey, and you can use NVIDIA to stream, build your own ladders. And the reason they're doing that is because transcode is really expensive. And Twitch doesn't want to pay for it because they're not making any money, because what they have is a lot of people that are doing really, really long streams. And it turns out doing lots of really long streams is not profitable.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from the QR code. Carly Johannes Lotier in Fort Duchesne, Utah is asking, why don't broadcasters and others make more of an effort to post correct remote interview audio? Original live hits can be treated before being used over and over. BBC, for example. Adobe and others would make these news clips less annoying.
Alexander, what do you think?
I don't work in the world of broadcast news, but I've had some training in the world of news gathering. And, a lot of things move very, very fast paced. I'm not going to make excuses. It's hard if you don't have a lot of time to prep somebody and you need to get someone interviewed. Maybe the audio is not going to be good and you don't have time to send a kit. But I do agree with you. It is very irritating when you look at what we do here on YouTube and then you look at what these corporations that have millions and millions of dollars, you think they'd be able to send someone a decent microphone. I don't think there's any excuse for that. As much as possible, they absolutely should send kits. They should plan people and test things and make sure that they get good audio and video. And I would like to see more of that because right now I just can't watch anything. It's so bad.
Alex.
Yeah, if you watch the open of the BBC, the BBC News with the big music and the swirly things and everything else, you will, at some point, they'll cut to this huge room behind the studio to show you all the people working on the news. Those are all the people working on the news that you see at that moment. It would be a lot more people if they had to, repackage it all. And as as both Alex touched on and Mickey touched on, saying that would be what would be the tangible ROI. The issue really is it's all about it just doesn't make how much money are they going to get out of repackaging these things later? Are they going to be able to advertise against it? Are they going to be able to? And generally the answer is no. You try to do the best you can in live. I know that for me, especially, and the other thing is there's a certain mentality. I work in live. I hate doing posts. When I'm done with a live show, I try to do everything I can to get it to be just the way I want it during the live show so that I can hand it to you and go do something else. A lot of times, this is a 24/7 moving train that they're on, and they just, once they're done with that content, they never want to see it again, and so if they have a viral moment, they might go back and grab it, or if a documentary person wants to do it, then it's, there's those types of things. But generally you just do it and move on. They're trying to do, when we talk to people for our podcast for Michael Krasny's graymatter.show, we send mics out. We have pre-checks. We push for Ethernet. We do a lot of those other things. And people say, I'm on broadcast all the time and no one asks for any of this. And I'm like, yeah, because we value your content over a long period of time. Your disposable content when you're with them, you're one of 8 people this hour they have to talk to. And they, just wanted to get within a very wide range so that they can and the other thing is, even if you put too much effort into it, it doesn't matter, because what they do to process you at the broadcast level is they just assume all Zoom and Skype and everything else are bad. And so they just crush the EQ on you to make sure that you sit inside of the space where you're intelligible. And so that's a whole nother problem, is that I've had people who spend a lot of money and time on it and they say, I still look and sound bad. And it's because they don't care. Like you're part of a pipeline. And so that's the issue.
Early in my career, the first time I watched a live hit, I was surrounded by a producer, an on-air talent, a sound engineer, a videographer who was taking the shot, and a grip or swing, somebody who was doing kind of the cartage and the rest of that. The last time I saw one was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and there was one individual sitting there tasked with doing all that stuff for the live insert. They were doing everything themselves. They'd set up the camera, they'd mic themselves. And so it's just a different world out there. And time, money, labor costs, all of that factor into what you're seeing. The big ones that have bigger budgets can do more, but boy, a lot of operations out there are on a skinny budget, and they're trying their best to put out good information. Alex, you wanted to get back in on this?
Yeah, I think we were talking, it might have been yesterday, it all kind of blends together for me, but we were talking about the size of the cable market and broadcast market and how small it's getting. YouTube is getting much bigger, the streamers are getting much bigger, and that puts a huge downward pressure on how much can be spent on all of these things. And so again, as Bill said, when I first moved into 20th and M in 2012, there was a crew, as Bill said, every remote kit was a crew of 3 people. Or 4 people. There was the producer, the camera, the audio, the remote talent, right? And there's 4 of them. We'd see them go in and out and in and out. And they had these great little carts, and they had their things and the broadcast cameras and everything else. So that was 2012, and we'd see it all the time. By the time we closed that office in 2019, it was everybody's on iPhones. Like it was the talent going out with their own iPhone with a little. I mean, it was, and some of them are going out with like the little white head, like it was definitely a different.
Get Apple earbuds.
The world had changed over that. Only that 6 or 7 years, the world had completely changed. And I think that is, and now the other side of that is that the phone cameras are as good. I mean, they capture a video quality as good as the broadcast cameras did in 2012. I mean, I would say better in some ways. So, if the controls are there and everything else, they actually look and potentially sound better than a lot of what people were using before.
Don't forget, your questions drive this show every single day, which means that we encourage you to put in your questions, whatever you're interested about. Get the question in there. It will be voted on by everyone, and you can use this QR code if you'd like to kind of get your questions in, even during the show as possible. The people in the back end will take a quick look at them, make sure they're appropriately formatted and can be read live on the air and things like that. Then they go into the mix. So that, plus those of you who are in the Mukana system in the back end, your votes always count, because you can vote things up. And when you do that, it rises both in importance and the amount of time we spend chatting about it and how quickly we can get to it. So you are a critical part of making this show happen. Thank you very much for all your question submissions. And now let's get to our next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, has anyone had to deal with CGNAT from their internet service provider? I had to deal with that with my fiber connection, but my ISP could thankfully disable it.
Jason Bache, help us out.
Oh, this is my favorite humble brag from Douglas Carmichael. Okay, CGNAT is carrier grade network address translation. And what that means is you're essentially one step up on the ISP's grade, and you're using more than one public IP. So configuring a router for it is pretty easy. Configure the LAN, configure the WAN, define an access control list, configure the NAT pool, apply NAT overloading, and then adjust the timeouts and limits, and then save the configuration. The problem can come where because you can be switching with other people that are on the circuit, sometimes you have to do a hairpin NAT because proper port management can get a little bit funky. Also, CGNAT can introduce certain kinds of latency depending upon what you're doing, and that can get goofy. But you know what? I would trade it all for a fiber connection.
There you go. Next question.
Next question's from the QR code Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada. Is there a proper way to clean your guitar strings after some heavy use?
Now we're getting to the heart of our questions. Excellent question. Jason, take this on.
Okay. I am a drummer, but I will give you the dumb drummer's answer. First, wash your hands. If you've been using your guitar heavily, wash your hands or you're not going to really do any good. Secure the guitar. Put it in a place that isn't your lap. And then protect the finish. If you've got stuff on the fretboard or if the fretboard isn't sealed, trying to clean the strings with anything that's even remotely useful other than friction, it can really dry out the fretboard. And then basically you take a soft, dry cloth and you basically pinch the strings one by one and kind of just gently brush up and down. After that, string cleaner, what's it called? Fast Fret. They make a lubricant, and I'm not sure if it's better or worse as not playing guitar, but a string lubricant, and then clean the fretboard. That's basically all there is to it.
And if you're a bass player playing flat wounds, you're fine. If you're playing round wounds, you need some sort of solvent because it gets all sorts of gunk in there. Alexander.
Well, I can speak to this because I am a guitar player and I've played guitar for a very long time. This kind of question drives me crazy because, first of all, and although I mainly work with audio stuff, I work for a big Canadian music retailer, and we get people all the time trying to save their old guitar strings. Look, on average, most guitar strings, a fresh pack is going to run you anywhere from $6 to $8. Just replace the strings. Just please do it. You'll get better tone. Don't try to save these rusty strings, especially if you have very acidic sweat. Some people go through strings a lot. Just change the strings. It's that simple.
And your old set can be used for slicing cheese. Alex.
Yeah, what you do is you get a coffee maker, and every time you look at what it costs to Starbucks, and every time you make your own coffee, you just take that money and you put it in a little jar, and you just and so stop buying coffee at Starbucks and just put that little money at $3.25 for the drip, or since I make lattes, I can put $5.50 in there. Anyway, and so you drop that in there every time you do that, and then you've got this little jar of buying the things that you don't want to buy because you have to. So, but the thing that I thought was really interesting, I was talking to a guitarist from a band, a pretty big band from the 90s. And, we were talking about guitars and the strings, but we were also talking about the frets. And he said, the frets are a really big deal. And it's a big difference between the cheaper, and Alex can probably, but the difference between the frets is a big deal. Like, so he said I think we might've talked about this before, but he said it was the difference between the Strat that is a Mexican and American. He said, I buy the Mexican one, and then I take it to a guy, and he refrets the whole thing, and he also puts up new pickups in. And he goes, and then it's better than the American one for the same price. so it's a really it's a really interesting puzzle. Also, there were a couple things that came in over the CGNAT. John Wallace posted. I'm just going back a little bit because John Wallace said carrier grade NAT private IP is delivered to your router. You can't port forward with a CGNAT because
apparently I got that one really wrong.
Right. So we're correcting it. We're trying to do the best we can. And one of the things that we're really working on, if you're watching the show, and you're in Mukana, we're really working more and more to bring that conversation in because we have this huge brain trust, that is watching the show. And so we're going to be doing more and more of this. And so sometimes we used to have kind of a religion about not going, I know we don't talk about religion here, but we had a religion of don't go backwards, just answer the question, do the best you can, move forward. But we're going to, every once in a while, if we see a correction coming in, especially if you can do it during the question, we're definitely going to jump to it. But if you do it after the question, we may go back and correct ourselves a little bit to try to give you the best information during the show while you listen to the record. So John Wallace said, carrier grade NAT, private IP is delivered to your router. You can't forward with a CGNAT because you're translating to another private address that can't be reached. Jason, you talked about having multiple public addressable IPs and managing that which is easy if you want to have a prosumer router. So those are John also said, I use a dishwasher or washing machine to clean his bass strings. There you go. That's another one.
There was a comment in there that disappeared, I think from Robert Linkman, saying, 100-octane gasoline for cleaning your strings.
Wash your hands with 100-octane gasoline.
Yeah. Also, Mickey said effectively, customers are under CGNAT receive private IP addresses from within the carrier's own large-scale private network. Customers do not get dynamic.
Yeah, that was the part that I got
IPs.
Really wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we encourage you. We encourage you to watch this live. We encourage you to, answer those questions. These were, as you can see, they were done very diplomatically and just simply giving us the answer so that we can give you back to you. So it's a good example of kindly nudging us in the right direction. Oftentimes, we're not going to have a person that can answer every single question on air because it's a lot of work to get up and do this in video. But we're here to, we're going to be trying to leverage more and more of the chat inside of Mocana, which, of course, if you're not watching this and you want to get into Mocana, you can go to you can go to officehours.global/join.
And you will never get 100% accuracy as long as I'm involved on any panel here. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Marielle Jusha, Miera, and Wablo. How are the camera sources synchronized when you cut from wide to a close-up on the same talent?
Jason, you want to start us out?
Well, I'll start with not live, and I'll let Alex handle live. If you're using a nonlinear editor, then usually you synchronize the clips prior to deciding what you're going to be cutting between, and then you're just simply in sync all the way through.
And Alex?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that. It depends on whether you did a line cut or not. So what we don't know here is how are they sourced? Are you talking about post or are you talking about live? Obviously live, they're going into a switcher. So they're happening at the same time. You may need to genlock them if you really want them to be absolutely perfect. That's also going to reduce the latency inside of the workflow because it doesn't require them to be retimed as they go into the switcher. A lot of switchers let you do that now, but you do lose a couple frames when they do that. How do they? If you're doing it in post, the best way is time code. So you're trying to have them all have the same time code, and that's going to allow them, all your NLEs will know what to do with that. So you'll say, I want to sync all these clips and use time code to sync them, and boom, they're all going to be synced up. That also means that you can sync them with your audio. So if you're recording audio separately, you can time that as well. If you don't have time code, and a lot of people, especially when they're getting started, don't have that. What we do, we work at as a backup, even if we have time code. So I did one over the weekend, and we had time code going to all the cameras, but we also, as a backup, I run program audio into the cameras. In our case, we ran Dante into those, Dante to Audinate, and then dropped it into the cameras there. And so what that allows us to do is we have a clean audio track of program, and I'll do that with the left channel. On the right channel, I leave the mic open in the camera. That way I have both of those there. It also lets me kind of look at any kind of delay or anything else that happened there. But what that allows for is we can look at all the audio signals. Most NLEs will let you sync via audio signal. So if you have a good, clean audio signal coming into the camera, and you line up all the cameras and you say sync from audio, it'll just pull them all together, and they'll generally be perfectly correct. The other way to do it is if you are recording and you do a line cut. So if you're doing a line cut and you already have that cut, what you can do is lay that on a track, and you go to each camera where you had cut to that camera, and you move, they have to be relatively close, but you start moving by frame the camera frame that you have. This is if you didn't have audio for it, until it turns black. You set it to difference and turn it until it goes black. And that means that you're on the same frame. You go a couple frames forward to make sure it's the same. And now you know that those signals are lined up, and you can sync them without audio, going through that process. Finally, you can use a slate. So you can use a slate where you just get up there and close the slate in front of all the cameras. One thing that we've done is take even something like Movie Slate on an iPad. You turn the cameras on and you just walk in front of them and show each one of the cameras that thing. It's not going to go out of sync in the 10 seconds it takes to do this, or the minute that it takes to do this. Walk to each camera, make sure they can see it. You can go into your NLE and type that in. You just go to a frame where you see your time code running. Type in the time code that you see there for each one of those, whatever frame you find it on, and it'll realign the time code, and then you can use that to realign the frames. So those are a couple different ways that we use to sync it in post.
Jason, you wanted to come back?
Well, yeah, and of course, from the chat, Mickey said, if you're plugged into a switcher, you can just, do it like straight away and cut as quickly as you want, because it's always going to be in sync relative to itself.
Hopefully that helped. Let's go to the next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York is asking, I've been using the Wondershare suite for tools like video downloading, DVD creation for .mp4 files, editing and file compression for sharing. Is there a better software suite for a good price I could be looking at?
I've had mixed results with that. Alex, what are your thoughts?
Nope. For what they do, for what they do, they're not perfect, but for what they do, I haven't found anything that works better. So, if you're doing video downloading, the one thing I will say is that Downy is the best at downloading videos from websites. So if you're downloading from YouTube or somebody's website, like literally, if someone's doing HLS to their website and you point Downy at it, it'll go carve through the source code and find you the M3 U8 and let you pull it, because all it's doing is just turning off the time to live. So it just grabs all those segments and just keeps on packing them up. So that's Downy's pretty great.
I use Downy as well. I had a bad experience with Wondershare only, and I don't know that this is still the case, so please do not color your entire impression with them, but they do a lot of recovery things. And there used to be this process in recovery software, if you had a hard drive problem or something like that, you wanted to get it back, that a lot of companies would make these solutions. They would go through your entire supposedly erased drive. They'd find all this stuff, but then they'd hold you hostage and saying you have to pay a significant piece of money to get the part of it that allows you to actually recover what we found. I'm not a fan of that model. I do not mind you charging for software to do a function like recovery, but that kind of generic hostage model I was never comfortable with. It may be completely changed now. Again, I'm not trying to say that that's what they are now, but I've never had a particularly friendly feeling toward that particular brand because of that. Maybe out of date. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do remember those terrible, terrible days. If you're on a PC, first, for DVD authoring, no. I mean, that's a very, very closed loop, and it's very simple. But if you want to just author and then just burn the straight drive or burn the straight disk, if you go to Ninite.com, the combination of VLC mixed with K-Lite codecs and then Handbrake will allow you to author just about anything and configure it pretty much any way you'd like, short of creating the entire disk image. And it's been so long since I've created an actual DVD for use in a DVD player that I can't even comment about that.
Understood. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from someone named Alex Lindsay in Novato, California. I worked on a hybrid event over the weekend. I can talk a little bit about it if people are interested.
I think everybody's interested. Alex, what happened?
Again, I'm not going to talk about the details of what it was or how it worked there, but I can talk about. I thought it was an interesting puzzle. So it's a small and a lot of the stuff I do has a lot of hardware, and this was a relatively light show, and so I thought it would be interesting to talk about a little bit. So we had a hybrid event. We had about 100 people in the room. We had about 250, I think, online. watching, so slightly more than there. And it was an all-day event. And one of the things we want to do, of course, is produce a good result for the folks that are online, but also, capture something that we could use in post and make it as good as we possibly can. So we chose because we could control all the cameras, and we didn't have very much budget. So it wasn't like a big budget show where I've got tons of huge crew. It was a crew of 4. It was myself and Kevin. I was cutting the show. Michael Coleman, who's been on the show in a second hour, was my main camera, and he did most of the hard work. My son is now becoming a camera operator, so he was doing some very basic camera operation. The thing that was interesting that I kind of enjoyed and I thought it was worth talking about was that we used 6 Blackmagic cameras. We had the stage up here, and then we had chairs out here. We had 2 cameras. We had 2 people up front. We had 2 cameras in the back. And so we had one shot that was kind of wide and framed and then one that would pan back and forth between the 2. So it would just go back and forth. So my son would sit there and just reframe everybody going back and forth between those. But we had that wide camera here. Over to the side here. And so we have all these people. We have 150 people in here. On the side, we had one side shot that was on a 16:35. So it was got the whole side of the room. That was there, and then another one that was basically searching and finding reactions and people who were asking questions and so on and so forth. So that was there. And then we had another camera that was down here, right behind the last row, that kind of captured it, and it was designed to capture the head and shoulders as well as the stage. So you kind of felt like you were there. It's kind of a dirty wide is what we tend to call it. So you've got heads in front of you, but you see the stage. And so it kind of gave you this immersive feel, which we put in like an hour before the show. I had an extra camera because we hadn't put it where we thought we were going to put it. And we were just sitting there. I was like, why don't we just put the camera here and see if it worked? We used it all the time. And then we had another one that we had put up in the up above that was about 12 feet high that kind of captured the whole scene. So those were we did. I still use line of direction, so this was my line, so I didn't change that. Now, those cameras were all coming back. We did use bidirectional, so the HDMI to SDI, and then brought those SDIs back. We used to get the audio, because there was 2 groupings of cameras there. We just sent Ethernet out, and we had Audinate that went into the Audinate to XLR, and then the XLR is into the side of the camera so that we had a clean program. We did have 3 belt packs, one for my son and one for Michael and one for myself. Kevin didn't need one. He was just kind of managing the audio record. And so what was interesting there is that, I routed all of it out of the Scorpio. So we had 6 signals coming in from the house. So they were managing audio. So we didn't manage the audio for it. Those signals came in, and they were like the room mics and the host mics and Zoom, et cetera. So that was all mixed, and that was summed down into stereo. That went into a Pix 240, which is what recorded the main audio, and just so that we had audio there. Of course, we have all the separate tracks, but the Pix 240 is our backup. No matter what, I've got that show. And then it went from the Pix 240, this is the weird part, it went in as it was set as audio for in, but it also looped that audio out, which then went back into an ATEM Extreme SDI and put the audio in there. That way it was in that record as well, because we were recording ISOs, DaVinci file, et cetera, inside of the ISO Extreme. And it was it was weird because then it sends its SDI signal back out to the Pix, which is just ignoring the audio that's coming back to it. So it didn't create a loop, but it was an odd way to do it. Inside of the Scorpio, we had that mix, but then I also built the mix minuses for the for the comms. So we were able to talk to each other over comms in the using the Studio Technologies belt packs, and it was all in the same mixer. I used the higher channels to go back and forth using Dante to do that, and it worked exceptionally well. And what's nice is I can pick off and send program to the second channel, so they have volume control and so on and so forth. I can send that out to the belt packs, and I don't have to figure out how I'm going from 2-wire to 4-wire, 4-wire to 2-wire, or anything else. It was all in the same place. And I think it would be hard to do more than 8 belt packs, because what I did is I built buses inside of the Scorpio and delivered those buses to the Dante outputs. Anyway, so I thought I don't have a lot of pictures I can show of it, but I thought it would be fun to at least explain it if people have questions tomorrow or whatever, or if that hopefully that kind of helps. The cool thing is we put the monitor in the back, and we sent the same program to the folks that are watching online. They were able to see it, and it really got me thinking about the next time I do that, adding more. We're going to probably put up 4 or 5 monitors with tiles. We thought we might try to do it. I mentioned that we thought we were going to do it this week, but it didn't. There were too many new things that I had done, and I sometimes will say, oh, there's enough new things for a show. So tiles, zoom ISO, so that we can place the person right over top of the camera with a separate monitor is another thing that's probably coming for us. But I think that it was a really interesting puzzle. We might also put a monitor eventually up front, maybe a little off camera, so that the folks in the room can see the person asking questions because they're in the back. So, but I did see why you could have a hybrid event, and we're trying to figure that out. So anyway, that's where we're at.
Dan Huber's comment was a simple 6-camera setup, and that's what struck me. I mean, did you ever think that you would have a 4-person crew and be able to operate 6 cameras live to the web? That used to be so complex to manage.
And it gets back into the ecosystem. Like I did drop back to I did use the Blackmagic cameras because it's an ecosystem. I could sit there and
right.
There were a lot of windows.
So you could shade things. You could
light. Yeah. So we were sitting there moving the shading back and forth for each in each session. Anytime we had a little chance, we'd realign all the. And I did, by the way, I did send that out to Scopebox so I could see what I was doing. So I did have Scopebox sitting there right next to me in a laptop, so I could look over and see if my levels were about what I wanted. So anyway, so that was another piece of that puzzle.
It's fascinating how production continues to change so rapidly, and the basic skills will always be valuable, but boy, you have to adapt as this changes.
And I guess this was basically a classroom. That's what we were doing here. So this is a classroom. Part of why I took it on, because it was not it's not a particularly profitable thing to do, is that I'm really trying to think about classrooms, because I feel like every time I turn a classroom on, to Dan Huber's perspective, I don't find watching a camera in the back of the room compelling. Like it literally to me is a solution for insomnia. Like I literally get narcoleptic. I mean, my eyes just like completely. And so I've been really trying to figure out how do you create something that is a much more. And so this is part of this is not only how do we do hybrid in a way that works, but how do you how do you make it compelling? Yeah.
We're pushing on our time limits here, but Roscoe had just wondered for you, so I'm just going to do this. Alex, why did you keep all the cameras on only one side of the room? What would explain your thinking?
Line of direction. I think that we, what happens is you start crossing the line of direction, and the viewers that are watching remotely or watching later have they have a hard time understanding where they are. And so I chose to keep them all on that side of the room. I don't always do that, and I may play with that to some degree, but it also means that all of our GAC, the egress in and out of the room we were able to push to that other side of the room. So all of our stuff was a lower impact on the people that are in the room. So that was another choice.
Yeah, the confusion of crossing the line sometimes matters, sometimes it doesn't. But that's why you go in, set up, and you see, does this feel right? Am I going to confuse the audience? Am I doing if I push this button and go to that shot, will they understand where they are, or they get confused because something is on the right, used to be on the left, and so on and so forth? We can sneak one more quick question in. Quick.
Jason Beish in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Alex, which comms platform did you use for such a small crew?
I used I used the inside the Scorpio. I actually used the Studio Technologies, the little belt packs. So they have these little Dante based belt packs, and so I didn't have to use a whole comm system. You throw those on the Dante network, and you're off to the races.
Got it. Just gave them their channels, and that's it.
Yep.
Perfect. Notes for tomorrow. Well, not actually tomorrow. In this case, I want to talk about Wednesday, because Wednesday we're doing something a little special. We have a voiceover panel. This is going to be people who have been doing voiceover for a long time, professionals. So if you're interested in all the various forms of voiceover, you'll want to be here, whether that's narration, commercials, audiobooks, video game acting, whatever it is. You'll have a great pro panel to discuss that on our Wednesday show. Also, don't forget tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific, that's 100 hours Zulu. Extra hours happens every week. This is part to time shift so that our viewers in Asia and Australia get to listen during their regular daylight time. Grant Whitehead is going to be leading the discussion, so check it out about 11 hours from now. Squares TV Application Lab tomorrow, also, or today after the show. Also, the Isadora Lab happens then. And an hour after that, the Mimo Live Lab with Oliver Breidenbach. Don't forget, Saturday, all Q&A as usual. And then Sunday, also as usual, it's our more philosophical hour. It's a show we do not broadcast on YouTube, so it's where you have a chance to experiment a little bit and also discuss more introspective and speculative topics. If you want to support what we do here, don't forget we are a 501c3, and this is where you can donate if you'd like. Go to officehours.global/donate.